Recently you wrote a very interesting piece called How Diplomacy Fails. And you quoted President Obama's by now quite famous speech at West Point recently, where he said, "Our military has no peer, but just because we have the best hammer does not mean that every problem is a nail." And you said that insight implies we should be skilled at measure short of war, that is diplomacy. For many reasons we are not. We suffer from a strategy deficit. And you've also decried the tendency in certain quarters to dismiss diplomacy as, quote, namby-pamby nonsense before we send in the Marines. So maybe that's how diplomacy fails, but why does it fail?
Well, diplomacy basically presupposes, since you raised the word engagement, it presupposes engagement. It rests on empathy, which is quite different from sympathy. To empathize is to be able to understand and put yourself in the position of another party, and therefore to understand the motives, the reasoning, and be somewhat able to predict the activities of that party. And it also depends on a related gift, which is intuition. Intuition's impossible without. Intuition is the ability to make correct decisions when you don't have correct information or complete information. And it rests in no small measure on empathy. So if you sit where we do today and you speak as we used to speak of Mao's China, now we speak of North Korea and we say, well, they're irrational. What you're really saying is, I'm not going to spend the time to figure out why they believe what they do and why they're doing what they do, because they have their own reasons, which may be appallingly mistaken, but which nonetheless are there. So the basic reason that diplomacy generally isn't even tried by the United States. Diplomacy is not coercion. It can be coercive, but it is generally an effort to try to reach a mutual adjustment of relations on a subject to mutual advantage. And most often that is not a coercive process. It may be implicitly backed by a threat, but it is essentially a process of suasion. Our system puts a premium on declaratory approaches to foreign countries. We condemn them, we express outrage, we demonstrate self-righteous indignation, and we impose sanctions, which are a form of coercion, which Woodrow Wilson incorrectly said were more frightening than war, and more likely to compel the surrender of other parties. And we now have 100 years of experience with Woodrow Wilson's thesis, and we can see that it never works. And yet we continue to do it because sanctions have all sorts of advantages. They shift the cost of foreign policy onto the private sector, not the politicians who impose the sanctions. They actually, they appear to be, they give the appearance of doing something. Generally what they do is harden the attitude of the other side and unite it against those imposing sanctions. In a way, I guess, what I was saying in that particular set of remarks was we need to try to rediscover diplomacy. We need to professionalize it. We're the only country in the world that staffs our diplomatic function through the spoils process, which measures the thickness of wallets, not the number of brain cells or wealth of experience that people bring to the job. So we have, I think that we're in an era now in which we no longer have the ability to dictate. We need to rediscover how to persuade.